Well, welcome everyone. This is Grant Writers for Farmers. I'm Ben. I have the pleasure of being on the CGA board. I used to run a small bagel business in Baltimore, but in one of my many hats that I wear, I also run a small grant writing and project development firm called Stepwell Strategies, where we work with food and farm businesses throughout the country to primarily go after federal grants, but we do a lot of state and foundation work as well. So we're here to talk about grants. Given, I think we've heard from, RB, where are you from?
I'm from Annapolis.
Okay.
I own Grey Wolf Spirits.
Okay.
We're transitioning from being more industrial oriented to doing an agriculture-based distillery.
Very cool.
So yeah, I'm interested in this just because anything that I just saw value-added land there.
Yeah.
A lot of what I do contributes into that sphere as far as donating grain back to farmers and stuff like that after I process it.
Very cool. Sandra.
Hi, I'm Cassandra. I work at Chatham University at a center called Craft. We also help farmers write grants and also have grant opportunities and resources for farmers. So I thought I would just sit in.
My name is Clarissa. I go to Chatham University as a food studies graduate student. And I'm working with a farmer currently on writing a grant, so this felt particularly pertinent.
Oh yeah, what grant do you mind sharing?
It is the Northeast SARE.
Okay, great. We'll talk a bit about Sarah for a second.
Nice.
Hi everyone, my name is Camille. I am also a graduate student in the food studies program at Chatham, and I work at Craft with Cassandra, and I have zero experience with grant writing. I'm just here to hear.
Great. All right, well, the way, and Caroline.
Oh, yeah, hi, I'm Caroline. I'm a farmer and a grant writer, and I'm really excited to be here today. My background right now, I'm a flour producer, but I spent about 5 years working as a technical service provider for farmers doing all different types of growing, from like livestock to grain to vegetables to what have you. So I'm excited to be here and work with the team.
So today what we have planned is just to kind of go over a bit about what's out there. Some pointers, so this will be helpful for folks who are thinking about going after grants, and then because we don't have this, we usually do this over 3 hours, so we only have 2 or like an hour and a half. So we're going to skip some things and actually just do a mock review in part of the VAPG proposal, the value-added production grants that we just put in front of you. So given the group, we might all do that together even. But it should be a chance to kind of see what it's like on the other side. So we actually have a grant that we did this year to review together. So really quickly, this is just the rest of our team. We all come from food and ag backgrounds, so I did a lot in stewardship. Caroline's a farmer, our other colleague Lauren is a farmer, and Bree does farming institution work. So we know what it's like to be on the other side of this table for sure, and being the ones being like, what the hell, how do we get money? What do we do? Why do they make it so damn hard? And our hope is to kind of alleviate some of that for folks.
Yeah, so we wanted to start by going over some of the different types of grants that you'll likely encounter, whether you're working as a grant writer or whether you as a farmer are looking for different things that you can apply for. So we divided them into a couple categories. The first would be community-based, which is things that like your local economic development office might be offering. They're usually smaller pools of funds, but you might hear about them from like a technical service provider or in a city or county official who you have a personal relationship with. Often they're one-off, and they can require local connections to find, but like many of these, and you're probably gonna hear me say this a million times, you'll hear a lot of things from being on email lists. So it is worth signing up for all of those, local, county, government email lists. Also, nationwide and nonprofit and foundation grants. So these are typically more simple applications than some of the federal applications, which is what we have a sample of federal one. But because they're nationwide, they're usually extremely competitive. There's not like a centralized database where you can find information about that, so it's helpful to just know kind of what organizations often offer these types of programs and where might you find one. So one that I believe is opening this fall, if it hasn't already, is the American Farmland Trust Brighter Futures Fund. That's something that's been going on its third year now. So it's just helpful to kind of keep a list of organizations that do this. Okay. And then we made our own distinction here between like the more localized federal programs and the national federal programs. That's not like an official designation, but it's a helpful category.
What we call that.
To delineate between them, right? So the Natural Resource Conservation Service offers a couple of different cost share programs. They're not technically grants because they're cost share programs. We wanted to talk about them just because a lot of farmers take advantage of these. And they're one of the few regularly available sources of funding that can actually fund infrastructure, which is one of the most difficult things to get funding for on farm. Typically, there's a local office who can help you navigate the process. And like many grants, they do require you to put the money up front. Not all of them do, but for NRCS specifically, typically you have to pay, sure you can pay for the balance and then get a refund.
You usually want to become best friends with your office because they hold a lot of power in some of the offices of how that money's spent. And some of the offices have folks who have been there for a really long time and have some really kind of standard thinking about how they want to do things. So, there's always, it never hurts just to know who's there. How helpful are they going to be? Are they the type that, just want to do the bare minimum and then call it a day and they have the folks they've worked with for years? Or are they going to be ambitious, especially if you're doing something maybe they haven't seen before?
And this is where too also just building those relationships with people in your local region. You might find somebody who said, oh, they told me that these things wouldn't work, but they actually did fund this program. Or maybe the other person has a relationship with the person who's the gatekeeper for the funding and might be able to, do some networking for you. And then the other category, and this is where we as a team at STEMCO mostly work, is the nationwide federal programs. So these are the opportunities that are listed through the federal agencies. They're often huge awards in comparison to some of the others. Often they require partnership, or you'll be more likely to be successful if you were in partnership with other farmers and organizations. They're not always directly for farmers. You might see a lot of great funding opportunities, but they require a nonprofit or a university to be administering them.
Maybe someone like Chatham.
Maybe.
They're also extremely competitive, and we've been seeing, especially this year, that they've been getting increasingly competitive as more people kind of feel empowered to go after them, which is great. More people should be seeking funding, right?
So for example, there's a few federal categories of funds that I used to say were I would tell folks 1 in 3 shot, you would get it. I now am hesitant to say 1 in 4. There was a program that they did for the first time, which we'll talk about, called the Local Meat Capacity Grants this year. It had over 1,000 applicants and $750 million, $450 million requested, and they only had $75 million to give out.
And these are typically the most complex applications, but different benefits to that.
So what we're going to do now, any questions there before we jump in?
On the NRCS and that type of thing with infrastructure, how difficult is it usually to get some sort of a tweak to what they usually do? I've seen a lot of people get NRCS high tones. I don't have any interest in a plastic covered high tone, but I could really use one that's covered with hardware cloth to keep out the rodents and birds. How hard would it be to is that basically up to the local office, or do they have?
To some extent, NRCS, specifically the EQIP program, I could speak to them, is they actually have to come out and measure the tunnel and see that it's covered in the plastic and that it meets, they have a checklist of standards it has to meet for that. Because the reason that piece was funded is because it prevents fertilizer and soil runoff during the winter for farmers who are doing season extension. So there may be ways to do other things. The NRCS typically does not have a lot of flexibility within the EQIP program.
But it is a huge, massive list of potential options. So
Yeah.
something might be worded, it's worth kind of running down, talking to your office, see if they have any ideas.
I understand it's like a 3-year window where you have to report back or something like that, and then after that, it's your piece of equipment, you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, and then technically you like have to come out and see it, but that's another thing you can ask your local person, there's if there's flexibility there, or if there's not.
So when we any other questions?
Is like the increase in requests for funding, is that simply because like more people are feeling up to applying for it, or is it because there's like an increase in farmers that could utilize that funding?
So it's not the latter, it's an increase in awareness about the programs.
Okay.
Caused in part by the bipartisan infrastructure law and some of the COVID recovery money, that it's great. They pumped a bunch of money into existing programs. It's not a bad thing. But they also pumped more money than they ever have in a lot of ways into technical assistance as well. So for example, they created a whole meat processor technical assistance program. And they have folks dedicated all year round to just supporting meat processors now. Those folks are great. They're very good at their job. I keep joking with them that they're too good at their job because they're getting so many applicants. It's that USDA is kind of, to some extent, starting to think about the wraparound services. Chad, and you guys, we were talking about this yesterday, part of a rural business development center, right? Rural Business Finance Center, but
Regional food business.
regional food.
Sorry, you said all those things and I couldn't think of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
some are,
Yeah.
so they've stood up these centers throughout the country that are supposed to be for technical assistance. So definitely talk to the Chatham folks about what they're doing because, that might be applicable if you're in the Appalachian region. And they have, technical assistance money and all sorts of things that they're doing throughout those groups. So it's a double-edged sword, right? Because if everyone is pointing everyone to limited resources, and that's what the work is, it just gets more competitive and harder to get. And then there's changing tides with what one administration wants to focus on versus another, and where they want to put money this year versus next, and things like that. So there's always those things to balance too.
Will the farm bill be passed?
Yeah, and then there's also everyone just waiting for if and when a new farm bill passes, and what programs will change because of it. So what we like to do is just talk through so within USDA there's different agencies, and we kind of focus on these major agencies, and we'll talk through the grant programs that are most relevant to food and ag in each of these, food and ag businesses and farmers in each of these. We actually are not going to talk about NRCS because it's a little more complex. So the Agricultural Marketing Service, so this agency, is the name implies exactly what it is supposed to do. It is supposed to help you with marketing. So they have a series of programs that are, in my opinion, really well suited for grain distributors. So folks who are kind of in the middle of the supply chain. Someone like you, RB, where you're maybe working with a lot of different farmers to supply you, and then you are a market aggregator right in the middle, and then you're working with a bunch of customers. Those are we talk about that as kind of the ideal fit. It's a good program. It has a planning category, a max category. There's a very similar program called Farmers Market Promotion Program. What I always tell people is that does not mean farmers markets, although they give a lot of money to farmers markets in that program. It means direct farmer to customer marketing efforts. So that's why a farmers market does, supporting the development of a farmers market makes sense, but it's not the only way you could do that. You could have a farm store where you're bringing in products from many places. You could have different types of food hubs or collaboratives that actually fit that program. The Regional Food System Partnership, not really an individual grant, but if you're a member of an organization like CGA or other groups where you're trying to build a network, that's a great one there. I'm not going to talk about meat. Within rural development, there's kind of two programs that are really relevant to farmers. The first is the value-added producer grants, which we will spend a lot of time talking about. But essentially, that is a grant that will either give you $50,000, $75,000, or $250,000 to market and develop a value-added product. With a lot of these grants, this one included, there's a lot of limitations on infrastructure. So one of the hardest things to ever get funded through grant funding is the infrastructure side of it. They don't want to buy large equipment. They don't want to buy land usually. This will cover some supply costs, staff time, marketing. Like that's what you want to focus on in a grant like that. As I say, it's hard to fund infrastructure. I'm now going to talk about a program that does fund infrastructure, which is the Renewable Energy for America program, or the REAP program. This is a really great program. There's kind of two categories, an energy efficiency category and a renewable energy category. There's a lot of flexibility. It only covers 25% of the cost in most cases, so you have to have the remainder of the cost identified. But what's nice about it, especially this year, is they pumped a lot of money into it, and then there's deadlines every 2 months.
There's three.
There's either 4 or 6 deadlines this year. So it's not the type of thing where there's one deadline a year, and then if you miss it, you can't do it again. You can do it when you're ready for it, which is, the NRCS programs, you can do that too to some extent. Like there's few programs that are on your schedule and not on their schedule. So that's a really nice aspect of that program. If you're doing anything kind of innovative, researchy, working on the education side of it, you're going to want to look at SARE. You were talking about that. You're probably, forget what's open right now, Farmer Rancher.
It's the farmer with a combination of research.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's like generally a pretty small grant, not a huge amount of money. But again, it's like you want to do some sort of on-farm research. You want to trial a new variety for your distillery. Something like that. You might partner up with a university. Usually you need a few partners, so you need some, usually you need an academic to be involved in it in some way as a partner. And a PI actually, like a principal investigator in most cases. And stop me if you have any questions on this. We're just running through stuff. Yeah.
Could something like a research and education grant be used to fund, say you mentioned you need a PI on it, someone who is conducting like a PhD project on site for a farm?
So you can cover staff time, which is essentially what a PhD's time is, right? Like I know the university hides it, but essentially they're paying your time, right? Yeah. That's how they charge it. It would depend on the nuances of the project, right? But typically grants will cover your time to do the research or the work. So usually, a SARE grant often is a university leading it, and often they're paying for graduate students' time in some way to do that work.
So that falls, as long as the project falls within the scope of the purpose of the grant itself, that funds could be used for something such as.
Yeah, if you were doing research and you were spending 50% of your time on that research project, you could, and that was like a 1-year research project, I'm just saying, for example, you could cover 50% of your time, with it, there's nuances to it, so there's, indirect rate, which is your overhead, or fringe, which is your benefits, and how is that covered? So every universities are I don't know about Chatham, but you guys can probably speak to it better than I can about universities they're usually pretty good at knowing how to kind of fit a grant budget. They usually have very high indirect rates, which can sometimes be a barrier, but they can often, they know kind of how to cover your time with grants usually. Is that fair? Chatham people?
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've been at a university. Yeah,
I have a
please.
question about the other ones that are a little more likely for a farmer to be able to get them on their own without the PI. there are so many aspects to it for a paperwork phobic person like myself, you know, who comes into it, like before I bend my mind to that task, I want to have some sense of how
The lift.
it will, not only how much work is going to be, but is there a decent chance that what I want to do is going to fit, or am I wasting my time? And what I need the most is like a conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
I found that devilishly hard to pin down. Like, even though I know people who are connected to the SARE program, they're like, I'm not sure who you need to talk to. You know, like, who's the actual human being? If they're
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Sarah's hard, like, different agencies are, you know, level of openness. One of the reasons why I really like the AMS program, the first one we talked about, is because that agency, pardon my language, like, has their shit together. Like, they are really good at what they do. Like, the people who manage the grants, I mean, there's still annoyances, but, like, you can call them up. Like, I know that 1,000 applicant story because I was on the phone with someone who's running that program. And they told me, which they probably shouldn't have told me. I guess it's all FOIA-able. But, you know, one thing that we have started saying to folks too that we work with and like is that if you know a program is coming out, the best time to reach the agency is the other time of year when the program is not out. So, you know, SARE is an every year program. It's run by the same people every year. They know how to manage it. So are a lot of the AMS programs. All of these programs that we're talking about right now are actually every year programs. They're pretty, I don't think any of them are really going to change that much with the new Farm Bill either, probably. Because it's hard to get rid of stuff like this.
It's a lot of entrenched interest.
Yeah, so know who your folks are. They often go to conferences in the off season. They often are willing to talk through like, you know, what their scope is. So sometimes reaching out to them and, you know, maybe the grant is open now and you reach out to them in March because you know it's gonna open in November and you wanna be prepared. You're just like, hey, usually they have more free time.
The other thing that you can do is almost all of these programs will have lists of the awarded grants with like a publicly available blurb. And so if you're trying to see if your project is in line with what they have funded previously or how previously funded applicants talk about themselves, it just kind of Googling like the name of the program and then like awarded projects will usually give you a lot of useful information, at least as a starting point, so that you also can frame questions a little bit differently when you approach the individuals as well.
You can also talk to the folks who, like we often in our work, reach out to folks who have won awards in the past. You know, if there's someone, you might read the SARE list of, you know, awardees and find someone who wants to do exactly what you're trying to do or something similar, like an evolution of what you want to do or vice versa. And you can just, you know, Google them or sometimes there's contact information on the various pages. And you can usually folks we just did that for a grant. You know, we have a client who's very concerned about the NEPA process, which is like an environmental process that they have to go through and how it'll delay their project. So they wanted to talk to someone who had won, we happen to know someone who had won the grant last year. So we called them up and said, hey, could we connect you two to have a conversation? They did, and you know, he was able to answer the questions way better than we could have. So I encourage you to look for similar type organizations too. Yeah.
With any of these grants mentioned here, are there like rubrics for how those grants are evaluated in terms of impact and
All of them.
yeah, they're all available publicly pretty well?
So the past year's requests for RFPs or NOFAs that are all,
They're all available.
Yeah, so you can look at like score. Do you mean like the scoring or once they're awarded and what did they actually
Scoring.
do? Okay, yeah.
Scoring,
So
like say, oh well, we're really looking for projects that have a specific impact on a specific community or in a specific industry. If there's sub rubric.
yeah, so those exist. Yeah, so you can usually download last year's. It's called NOFO. Sometimes they call it an RFA or an RFP. A NOFO stands for Notice of Funding Opportunity. RFA is request for application, request for proposal. On the grants.gov website, if it's a federal grant, it'll be a NOFO is what they call it. But they're all the same. It's thing, they're telling you what to do. But yeah, they always have to show how they're scoring on federal grants, which is nice. And I think that's like a trick we talk about is in our work with folks is the goal is to get the money you want for your project, first and foremost. The second thing, when you're writing the actual grant, is to write for the scoring, not write like the prettiest prose you can ever imagine. They don't really care how well it's written. They care that you checked all the boxes, like the reviewer. Like we've been reviewers. Like it's a checkbox exercise.
You want to make sure it's
Yeah.
understandable.
There's a balance there. There's a certain level, but yeah.
You don't need to pull out the thesaurus.
So just a few more. So National Institute for Food and Ag, NIFA, people say different things, has a few programs too that are more geared towards nonprofit work than anything else. But again, where you might not be the lead, you can also be a partner sometimes. So like there's a program called the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program that's all around education, mentorship. You know, you might be involved doing some training or, you know, hosting a field day for work that's done under that grant. You know, community food projects are more on the food security side. You know, there's a number. That grant is interesting because it can sort of cover a little bit of infrastructure costs. You know, again, but more on the like nonprofit side. You have to be working with a lot of people. The GusNIP program this is what funds, if you've ever been to a farmer's market or places, and they might have SNAP benefits available, but then they might also have like double up food bucks or another incentive program that is if you spend your SNAP money on you know, fruits and vegetables, for example, they'll give you they'll pay for half of it. Or they'll give you double the amount that you could, you know, some sort of incentive for healthy eating. This program funds all of that. I mean, sometimes there's some private folks, you know, throwing money in, but the vast majority of it is funded through that GusNIP program. So, you know, like if you're doing like large scale CSA work, you might be able to find an innovative way to work on it. You know, I worked for a long time with a community grocery store. So it was a nonprofit grocery store in the Northeast. They use this program quite a bit to support a lot of their work. So those were kind of the 4 categories that we like to talk about, 4 agencies that have a lot of programs that are kind of rinse and repeat every year. The RFPs don't change that much. So you can kind of start getting, so one thing to keep in mind is an agency will usually only open the application window. I mean, they say anywhere between 30 and 90 days. It's usually 30 to 60. And it's usually 30 to 45. If that makes sense. Like, it's usually as short as they can get away with, where they think they won't get a bunch of flack from everyone. Because they always do this like right before the end of their fiscal year, and they have to rush to do everything. So it's like with those programs, it's really good to get prepared. Really good to, you know, think about, hey, well, I think next year we might want to do a value-added producer grant. What do we need to do now to qualify for it? How can we get prepared? And we'll talk a little bit about that. There's also what we call the one-offs. These are like big, crazy new ideas. Regional food business centers, for example. They did it once. They probably won't do it ever again. Maybe like, how long is the grant, 5 years?
It's a 5-year. There's a whole push for it to, there's like a policy push for it to be included in the Farm Bill, but who knows?
So yeah, I mean, a lot of these, like the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, this grant was a behemoth. They gave out $3 billion nationwide to this program. They gave out the largest award. I don't know if they gave out any $100 million awards, but I know they gave out at least a $90 million award. You could ask for up to $100 million. We worked with 2 folks that were like smaller smaller for the large category, and they were asking for 20 million. Like it's, you know, big amounts. There was a much smaller program that was up to 5 million that was more geared towards, you know, more regional efforts. The Increasing Land Capital and Market Access program was really cool this year. So that was and this is one if you are a farmer and you're interested in expanding land and you come from BIPOC communities typically or underserved farming communities according to USDA, so that might be a veteran, it might be BIPOC, it might be a woman-owned farm sometimes depending on the program. There's a few, like an indigenous farmer. This program is specifically targeted towards creating opportunities for land access for those groups. And like enabling land ownership over the long term. And that was a really cool program. Again, it was kind of a one-off. We'll see if it ever happens again. There's a big policy push. National Young Farmers Coalition and others are trying to make that more of a regular thing. But USDA is kind of innovating a little bit. One program that did come out for the first time this year, I do not believe it's going to be every year, but is the Organic Market Development Program, which was a pretty good fit for farmers and folks aggregating, especially if they were organic. You had to be certified organic at the time of application. You had to be in the process of being certified at the time of application. But that, again, honestly mirrored an LFPP, but for folks who were organic. Yeah.
Can I just mention something about the RFPs? So there are actually funds for grants for farmers within them. So even though it was a one-time thing, I just want to plug that there are 12 centers around the country. The Appalachian Center, which is what Craft is a part of, we have $16.6 million to give away in grants to farmers. Yeah. The Northeast one, I'm not sure what they have, but they also have money. And then there are centers that cover the whole nationwide, like the Indigenous Peoples Center. And so folks can qualify for multiple centers to apply for funding through, and there's no match required, and you can spend it on infrastructure and equipment. So just something to look out for. We're currently building the whole grant program out, but folks should start to see applications pop up by next summer.
That's great. That's a great point. I meant to say that too with the Beginning Farmer and Rancher program, other programs. A lot of these programs, like the Increasing Land Capital and Market Access program, a lot of these programs build in re-granting into them, and that can be a big boon. So it's definitely worth keeping your eyes on that. That's a great point. Thanks for that. So we can run through this quickly. Is this I don't want to do things very basic if folks already know in the room. We can, but it's typically what you'll see is kind of an RFP will get released. There might be some call with a Q&A. If it's a government Q&A webinar, it's usually not that useful. To be completely honest, you ask a question, they say, let me refer you to page X or we'll get back to you. Sometimes they answer questions. It really depends on the person. Then you're gonna prepare the application, you're gonna submit the grant. It's important to note grants are competitive, so we always tell people go in assuming you're not gonna get it. So start your business, don't pause and not do other things. Be talking to your bank, be talking to, be turning every stone over that you can. The review process usually takes a few months. It can be annoying because you won't hear anything back and you'll just be wondering, and then they'll probably have said what day they're gonna announce and then they blow through that day. So you'll be and then they push it. At that point, usually you'll hear there'll be an award notification. So they'll either make a big announcement and you'll find out at that moment, or sometimes they'll let you know beforehand and they'll send you an email. After that, there's usually kind of whether you got the award or not, depending on the agency, usually they'll give you some feedback. What we always say is if you don't succeed, try again. You get the feedback tells you what you need to do. You'll also have different reviewers. Every reviewer is a little different. So you don't know, you might have had the best application in the world for what you want to do, but USDA decided they didn't want to fund any more brewing operations, or they didn't want to fund a farmer in this region because they had funded 3 last year. You just never know what the reasoning behind them actually making the decisions are, because they go through this process where they do an administrative review typically after they do the review. So So they do a review for quality, where they're like actually saying like, does this check all the points? What's the score? Usually then they get a set of applicants that are kind of in that pool that could be funded. And then they usually have some backups there too. And they do an administrative review where they go through and like make sure you don't have any typos, the numbers all add up. It's more of like a process thing. And then they have a final selection. And it's what happens between that like numbers review and the final selection that can get a little like, you see politics kind of happen. Like maybe there's two groups in Montana that have really good proposals and they both scored highly, but they only have so much money to give out. Do they really want to give 2 this year to proposals in Montana? So they might skip over the one that scored slightly worse in Montana, just as an example.
You'll see often, you look at like the list of funded applicants and they're usually fairly geographically dispersed.
Yeah. They spread the money out, they want diversity of types, sizes, things like that, and they'll make that decision. So it might not be anything because of what you did. We already talked about RFP, RFA, NOFO. Does everyone know what matching funds and cost share means? Yeah? Okay. The one thing to note is that USDA agencies do different things with cost share and matching funds and how they describe it. It can be really annoying. Sometimes they'll say, we expect 25% matching funds. Sometimes that will be 25% of the total project cost. Sometimes that will be 20% off of the award. Obviously, those are different amounts. And sometimes they say the same thing, like they say both things in the application and then they have to revise it and fix it. So it's usually good to really read those sections about cost share and match and make sure you understand, are they saying like, you have to cover 60% of the total project cost, or they're saying you have to bring 60% of the match for the funds that they awarded. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so let's say you're getting $1 million.
Sounds great.
Yeah, but let's say, okay, so let's say it's $1 million and they say, but we require 50% match. Okay, so if your project cost $2 million and it was 50% match in a case, then like in one way, they could give you 50, they would give you $1 million and you get $1 million. It's basically like a 1-to-1 if it was of the total project cost. And I'm not explaining that super clear right
Like you
now.
would have to bring, you're building let's just say it's something that costs $2 million, a giant new building, right? You could have to put up $1 million in funds and show them that you have that money and are ready to invest it to have them be able to grant you the other $1 million.
But let's say it's a 50% match and the cost of the building is the other way. So it's 50% of the award amount. So in that scenario, I'm gonna be really bad at math really quick, but you would be able to get an award of what would that be, 2.5 million, somewhere around there?
Let's just say if you would have to do 500,000 for their $1 million. It's a
Yeah.
cheaper building this time.
Yeah. So now the building's $1 million, well, it's the same. Let's say
You can
let's
see
say
where
the
it
cost
gets
for the
tricky.
building is
Yeah.
1.2 million. Like you would have to bring less money. You would have to bring less money and they would give you more money. So if it's 50% of the grant award or it's 50% of the total cost, those are two different numbers. And you just want to make sure that you are reading carefully for what they are saying they are providing or asking you to bring. It's just sometimes the wording, as I just bungled it, is like it's nuanced and hard to kind of explain in writing, and they've gotten better about it. Usually they'll say like, they'll really like underline of total project cost. So just like so let's say it's like, 50% of the total project cost or project's $1 million, you're getting 500,000, they're giving you 500,000, because that's the max they'll give. In that same scenario, if they were saying 50% of the match, you could still get 500,000, but you would only have to show them $250,000 of match. So it's less that you have to bring to the table.
Does it matter where the match comes from? Like, let's say it's like an out-of-pocket match versus some other organization is willing to put up the match money.
It usually does not matter as long as it complies. So all match funding needs to be spent on generally allowable expenses within the grant. So like you couldn't, if a grant didn't allow you to buy a land, for example, you couldn't say, well, we're gonna buy land and that's our matching funds, because that's not allowable under the grant, so it's not allowable for match.
But if rental costs were allowable, then your lease cost would
Could
be
be
an allowable expense, yeah.
If you were already gonna pay it anyway, it doesn't matter as long as it's allowable.
And as long as it is in line with something that supports the goal of the grant, like you have to include it, it needs to be part of the project, if that makes sense. And we work with people all the time to think like, what's part of the project, right? Like, you know, oh, you're a food business that wants to rent a new space, you're probably gonna rent it anyway, but like, can this rental be part of your grant? Because that will help you free up cash for other things. So there's some like, it's like a bit of an art to it of like, what could we put in? What makes sense? How much staff time do we cover? Like how much, you know, do we need contractors? Like what is the highest and best use of limited funds?
It also can't be federal funds.
Yes, that is true.
If it makes anyone feel better, we've done the match wrong and they came back at us and we still got the grant, so.
Yeah, that's the other thing people don't
They will-
realize.
some
There is,
threshold, yeah.
there is an administrative period,
Yeah.
which we didn't talk about. Like during that award notification, there's kind of like a negotiating period, but basically it's they tell you what you did wrong, you fix it, and then they give you the grant. There's not much negotiating to happen.
But I guess that kind of thing is happening more often at the level of like a $250,000 grant as opposed to a $20,000 grant.
For sure.
So like, if I'm looking to try to be able to focus on my breeding work and working grants around to get that to happen, I'm probably not in that level, obviously, at this point.
Yeah, you're probably looking at like a SARE project or
Exactly.
something like they're smaller, but they tend to have a lot of requirements too, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, that being said, like they are generally every year, so, and a little, like, they might say, well, here's what you did wrong, apply next year. Like, they might, yeah. So, helpful things just to ask ahead of time. You know, really honing in on the keywords in the RFP, making sure you know that, looking at the past funded projects, we talked about that. Really thinking about partnerships. Who here has managed a federal grant? Like, okay. So, you know, it's not like the easiest thing in the world. It can be, I mean, there's some rinse and repeat to it, but it can be really annoying. So sometimes, you know, there might be opportunities to work with a local nonprofit or figure out if there's a way to get your project a part of a bigger project. And where you might not have to, you might be a sub-grantee within that project, and that can really help alleviate the administrative burden on your side. The other aspect of it that can be annoying, depending on your size, is how reimbursements work. So depending on the agency, different agencies look at this differently. Typically, you have to spend the money before they will reimburse the money. So if you are cash strapped or you have cash flow challenges, there's ways to kind of structure invoices so you're maybe not putting out a ton of money up front, but that can be a challenge. We often talk with our clients about lines of credit and like thinking about how you manage cash flow with lines of credit. You know the money's there, you know you have it, it's more about when do you have it, or when can you get it. We really, in our work, like especially right now, there is a program out there that would probably fit what you want to do. So trying to just say, what will this program fund, can we do it, is not what you want to do as a business. or an organization. I feel like, right now in the world, there's a lot of like, oh my God, there's a lot of money. Am I missing it? How do I go after it all? Like everyone, like me included, like just a deep breath, like it'll be there next year. Like it's not running out tomorrow. And it's really important to make sure that what you do aligns with the goal. Like what you want to be doing in your pathway as a company really aligns with the money that you're getting. Because getting a grant that you don't want is probably worse than not getting a grant at all. The administrative side of it, we talked a little bit about how competitive and how competitive are you? Like, for example, there's a federal program that's administered at the state called the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. And that program is often given to universities at most states.
But it's not written that way.
It's not written that way. So often we get folks, like businesses or coalitions that see that program and say, hey, we think this might be a good opportunity for us. And what you get in the review process generally is them saying, well, you're not serving the entire specialty crop sector. You're only serving your members or your organization. So there's like nuances that you really want to look at. What do they fund? What are your chances? How can you kind of figure that out? Do you have the capacity to write it? Do you have the capacity to administer it? Can you make sure that within the budget you put the money to administer the grant? So most grants have something called an indirect rate. Usually they'll let you put, for federal grants, usually they'll let you put 10% in. So a 10% indirect charge to cover all of your overhead, all your expenses related to administering the grant that are not like direct project expenses. It's usually not enough. Most companies' overhead is higher than 10%, unless you're super lean. The thing a lot of people don't realize is administering the grant, like the actual person doing the grant administration, all of that can be considered a direct expense. It does not need to be an indirect expense if it is directly related to the grant and administering it. So you can put, 5 hours a month in for a bookkeeper and do all that work. And you can put it in under the staff category, and then that frees up indirect use for other expenses. So it's kind of a way to think about. Making sure you have a lot of items on hand. I think it's Jason, right? Yeah, so like Jason, if you're thinking about doing a SARE grant next year, like what can you do now? SAM's numbers, if you're familiar, it's this system of administrative management, I think. But it is a number that you typically need to have. You have to have an active registration with SAM to apply for most federal grant programs. If you do not, they will not accept your application. Sometimes there's a way to appeal that, but it's getting harder and harder again. They were like loosening up on that during the pandemic. If you have to mail the documents, do you have a printer? Is everything good to go? Do you have to overnight it? Does it need to be signed for? Like some state programs, you need to like have someone essentially hand deliver it. So it's like, you have to FedEx it and someone has to sign for it. Like what sort of requirements go into it? Do you have to own the land you're putting the project on? Can you lease it? Do you have documentation of the permission? Do you have a lease agreement, etc.? And just like I can't reiterate the same thing anymore for folks, then like it's a pain in the butt process. Actually, it doesn't make sense to have anyone else but you do it for yourself because it just asks you a lot of stuff about your business. And like we help people all the time, and but SAM is a free process, costs $0. There are many scammers out there that try to get you to pay to apply for SAM. They'll say like $500 and we'll help you through the process. They literally do the same thing you would do if you just went to their website. Like they have no tricks. There is no tricks to it. It needs to be renewed yearly, and it's better to do it when you're not in a 30-day window for a grant. The amount of times we've had clients get their SAM's number, or their SAM registration active. I need to change my language, and I'll explain in a minute. Is because the day before the grant is too many to
if you're gonna take anything away from this and you're thinking of applying for a grant, when you go home, just start the process.
It's not actually that cumbersome, you just need to know when you started the business, have your EIN letter out, it doesn't take a lot. Sam a few years ago used a different system to create what they call SAM's numbers, or UEI numbers. It was called the Dunn system. And they switched 2 years ago. It was a mess, but they're through that now. And what is important to note is that within the SAM registration process, there are kind of a few steps, but at one point they will give you a UEI, a unique entity identity number. You are not done the SAM's process then. It just means that you are here, where you have an ID assigned. You do not have an active SAM registration. So I always tell people to go to the SAM website when you think you have it, or if you're working at a university, they'll have it, so you guys don't need to worry about that, which is great. And make sure that it says active registration. There should just be a number 1 there. If there's not, it means you still have stuff to do. And usually you just kind of click on wherever the 1 is and it takes you to that application and you can go through it. But that's been a real problem because SAM sends you an email that says, we assigned you a SAM number. And having that SAM number used to be, you finished the registration. It no longer is. So it's caused a lot of problems where people think they've completed the registration and they haven't. I'm gonna skip this. Maybe just go to
Alright.
activity.
So we are going to do a proposal review.
You go. Here.
Oh, sorry. Everybody's got this. Okay, so this is, this packet is a successful value-added producer application that was submitted this year by a client. They were awarded it and they're in the process of getting started now.
I'm supposed to tell them they were awarded.
Oh.
Oh,
There we go. Spoilers. But man, okay. I clearly need more coffee, guys. So just pretend zoom back a minute and we'll go from there. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to first print out this application so you can see this is a non-atypical length for a federal application. That said, the VAPG is one of the more onerous applications to apply to because there's so many very, very specific questions you need to answer and have very specific information. So what we're going to have.
Just one thing too about the VAPG program is that it is one of the few programs directly designed to work to give farmers grant funds.
Yeah.
It is designed for farmers. You have to at least, your inputs need to be at least 50% of the final product. There are a few programs where we're actually you farmer should be the applicant. This is one of those.
So because it's designed specifically for farmers, there's a lot of very specific criteria. And what they're requiring is typically they give you and you'll see on one of the earlier pages of the application, I believe it's, let's see if I can find it because this is a super relevant piece. It asks you to describe the actual how you are changing your product from the raw material. And so what they're specifically looking at for this grant is what is the raw material that you're working with? So it could be a cow, it could be a field of wheat, it could be your tomatoes. What is the value-added product that you're making? So what is the change in state? You can technically apply for branding something differently, but if you look at
Packaging your tomatoes, but they usually don't fund those.
Right. They're really, the projects that are the most competitive are the ones where you are canning the tomatoes and branding it as a new pasta sauce. Or you're turning that wheat into beer. That's another thing to pay attention to though, is if you were working with any sort of alcohol or any other federally regulated substance. So hemp is one that comes up frequently. There's specific other additional criteria that you have to make sure you're in alignment with. So this grant is great for the farmers who it works for. But one of the things to think about when you're looking at this grant, right, is do you really want to produce a value-added product? Like, will this actually add value to your business, right? Because if it won't, and you're trying to kind of push around the edges of it, it's probably not the right program for you, even though it is a lot of money. So I've seen farmers do it for a few different things. This farm is a mushroom farm that was interested in applying pickled mushrooms. So pickled mushrooms are something they were already thinking about producing. They already had a few like preliminary discussions with folks about it, and they said, yeah, okay, let's try and get some funding for this thing that we already are interested in. So the value-added producer grant has, there's two categories, and within the second category, there's two scales. So the first is a planning grant. You can get up to $75,000 for planning, and that's planning activities only. So that's research. It is hiring consultants to advise you on whether or not this is like a feasible project, to discuss do market research. You can also use, and they highly recommend that you use that planning grant to purchase a feasibility study. Feasibility studies typically range from
$15,000 to $30,000.
yeah, so it's a substantial chunk of change. So if you're interested in producing,
Is the center going to be doing any feasibility studies right now?
Some folks might do them already, but it's not like a specific program
Service.
that we're running, yeah.
but there are consulting firms out there that do write feasibility studies, and there are many that specialize specifically in feasibility studies for the value-added producers grant. That's not a requirement that's unique to this grant. Actually, many of the rural development programs and I think one of the meat processing programs are starting to require feasibility studies. And so that is something to keep in mind too, because that's additional lead time on the grant, right? So the planning grant can fund that. So typically, a planning grant, you won't actually need to spend a full $75,000, but you can use it to completely cover the cost of the feasibility study. The working capital grant is actually funds to implement the project. You can apply for the $50,000 and then you do not have to get a feasibility study. But if you want to reach the $250,000 cap, you are required to have a feasibility study if you're asking for any amount of funds over $50,000. So again, if you're trialing like a very small line of something and you just want to be able to cover some of the materials costs and offset that implementation, $50,000 totally makes sense. $250,000, you're probably going to want to get that planning grant first to really get that like robust information on is there a market for this? What are all the different things going to cost, et cetera. This program requires a one-to-one match. So 100% of what you ask for, you also have to provide in some form. And then there's a bunch more nuances in that, but we're not going to get into that piece right now. It's been a delight for us. Like Ben said, the focus is really on developing and selling products from local agricultural inputs. I've also seen, we've seen applications for things like indigo farmer who wants to produce dyes. So it doesn't just have to be like a consumable, like an edible product. And some of these programs actually are restricted to food. This one is not.
We did one this year. That's focused on pet hay, like just randomly a value-added product for their hay, that sort of thing.
And it can be a really long application.
As you see.
So, what we're going to do here is we're going to have everybody score this proposal. So we're going to, we talked about splitting into groups. I think we're going to one big group.
Maybe two.
Two, and then, two to kind of discuss. So, we don't have time to read through the whole thing, right? But we want to be able to see, like, in your hands what this actually looks like. This does not include the appendixes, which have all of the, like, here's my bank statement, and here's my certification that I'm doing what I'm doing, and X, Y, and Z. The most relevant section for the scoring is going to be section 6.2, which is the proposal evaluation criteria. So in this grant, actually, when they have reviewers review it, they have you spend the bulk of your time in section 6.2 and then reference other sections as needed to do the evaluation.
And what you're seeing too is their template. It is
Yes.
by far, of all the grants we do, the worst template. It is like absolutely terrible. And they're asking farmers who have never done grants before in their life to work in this template. So you can see like, I mean, I literally, before starting working at Caroline, I refused to do VAPG grants with folks because I didn't want to learn the template. I now know it, but.
And I have a love-hate relationship with it for, well, reasons
Yeah.
that Ben knows, but it can be really useful depending on the project.
So what we did for you was in the back page, we took out, so this thing that you see in this document that we gave you, this other one, is actually the scoring rubric for VAPG. So it's how points are scored, and there's a number of different categories. Do you know one of those? Is there a pile floating around?
Yeah, is there an extra?
So the scoring rubric has 6 sections.
That sounds about right. I think
We
there's
gave you
6.
3 of them to score, just to see what you guys think.
So the biggest, your biggest score is the nature of the proposed venture. But they also score you, this was unique in how they like rank the letters of commitment and support. None of those are attached. But it's something, you know, you can take this piece home and you'll be able to kind of get a better sense of what the requirements there.
So what we were hoping you guys could do as the 2 different groups is to score them, give it a read, 6.2 a read, kind of give a quick score. Obviously you're doing this fast, it's not perfect, etc.
But we're mimicking how the review process works, right? Like your reviewers usually have other jobs, they're not full-time grant reviewers, they're usually not on staff with USDA, like.
They get a stipend, very
Yeah.
small one.
It's $200 for reviewing one of these typically, for a lot of hours of work, or not very many hours, depending on how nice of a reviewer they are.
So yeah, I think, and then we're gonna compare and see how you guys, what you all think.
The threshold for a winning application this year was 69.3, almost 70 points out of the 100. And then if you have time, which we probably won't, but the other section that we would recommend reading for the scoring is the bias.
Any questions?
I have a general question, since this is kind of a recurring thing, and I apologize if you guys heard it earlier, but with the increase of the application flow overall, how are funders like accommodating the processing those additional applications? Or what I'm getting at is like, is it the case if you have an open application period, is it really important to get your application in as soon as possible for hope of review, or?
No, it's.
For federal, it doesn't matter.
So some applications.
So they're required to read every single one as well.
There's some programs, I will say, like we talked about the REAP program, the Renewable Energy Program. So they review that every quarter. We were trying to figure out if it was quarter or every other month. But that's like, they have a certain amount of money they're trying to get through. So that will like eventually run out. It keeps getting re-upped. So, but like in that program, the longer you wait, there's risk.
Of the money running out, essentially.
Theoretically, it could, right? Because like they could not, refill the coffers again. And, you know, they pumped in some extra. Everything, like when there's a big legislative bill, like the infrastructure bill, they usually don't design new programs. First, they dump a bunch of money into the existing programs, and then they start building the new programs, and they did that the last few years. So we're seeing the return, like, I don't know if we talked about this, but we, like the LFPP, the one I talked about at the very beginning, that one, 2 years ago, the pot was 37 million or 30, and then last year it was 33 million available. This year it was 15 million. So they cut it in half. Yeah. Yeah, that's not, we can talk about it. I've done this long enough that I know that the USDA puts the awardees up on the website before they actually announce them.
Yeah.
They like hide the file on the website and you just have to know what it's named. So I've seen the awardees for this year.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I know a lot of people waiting.
It ended up being about 1 in every state.
Okay.
They really
gave
did
33 awards.
geographic.
Yeah, they gave 55 for FMP.
So say an application for these is open for like 28 days or 30 days, you you don't necessarily, say they, like you said, there's thousands of applications, they hit their point of like, we've gotten all the applications we can process within an amount of time, will they cut that application period off early, or no?
No, they'll just delay. Typically what they'll do is, so one great way to become knowledgeable about the program is to become a reviewer. So USDA puts out calls for reviewers all the time.
They're calling for MPAP right now.
Yeah, I just got the email
I
today.
can forward it.
We're usually like excluded from reviewing things because we've written grants. Like if you've written a grant that's in the pool, you're technically not supposed to. I know like last year for at least one category, they said we just need more reviewers. So like one of our team members, she was still a reviewer. She just wasn't allowed to review anything that she had touched or anything in her geography, you know. And typically you don't review like people in your area.
Yeah, there's a recusal process, and when I was a reviewer, it was one that wasn't in my geography, but they had a letter of support from somebody that I happened to know, so I had to recuse myself from that.
Do you guys have other questions? We have like 15 minutes, so we don't have to do the activity if it's better just to chat.
I mean, the thing that I really wanted you guys to see in this one is a lot of times we're working with clients, and getting information can be a little bit like pulling teeth, because as all of us know, we're incredibly busy. We don't plan to like save the entire month of April to apply for a grant, right? You're adding that working on top of whatever else you're doing, unless your job is to be a grant writer. But this application, they gave so much information about their like biographical information and their manufacturing process. And that is something that, like, you know, there's not a page limit on this, on the VAPG. Some of these grants have page limits. This one doesn't. And having that level of detail and level of information, I think really made this stronger.
There's no page.
I don't believe so, or if it is, it's very high. Maybe there's a page limit, but it's high. It lets you,
It's not
like-
40 additional.
maybe it's 40, but it lets you do, you can put a lot of information in it. You're right, it's gotta be 40. They have to have a 40 limit.
I don't know.
That's why, I know that
We'll get
LMP has shorter ones,
Yeah.
much shorter.
Yeah, the page limits are like,
Yeah.
sometimes they're like killer.
It must be, but we didn't have to cut information from this one, we stretched some of this.
I would love to know about the review, like how to become a reviewer.
Yeah, I know.
So
What's your
what's your review, no, I think that's like.
Yeah, there's a website you sign up for most, and then they like put out a call and they ask for reviewers, and then you have to submit a resume and like show that you have some experience. But they need reviewers right now.
Sarah Northeast is
Here.
hiring for reviewers right now.
Anybody who wants to, you can just put your email address in
I'm
here.
glad you guys shared
We'll
that.
forward it to everyone.
Absolutely, because we currently have an FMPP that's
It's gonna
helping
come from
farmers to
my farm
value
email.
add products.
Yeah, it's,
So, but like we're doing
so-
a bunch of TA, but we're like, we could help them
for sure.
or direct them here.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing about VAPG too that's helpful is it's one of these grants that there is a state coordinator in every state who manages it. So most of them are great, but it's highly variable. We know the one in Pennsylvania if you want.
They're amazing.
They were really good.
Yeah. We
So
just
this
finished
project is actually in Philadelphia.
Did anybody else want the
We
call?
just finished a 12-week course with farmers, like market readiness course basically,
Oh, cool.
and I have like 3-4 farmers that I would be recommending.
But my book now.
Yeah, and there's a lot
Really?
of yeah. The program is written in the farm bill. It's not like the other ones. The guidance, they point you to the guidance in the farm bill, and
What's
you have
your-
to go to the legislation.
What's
to
your,
read
do
it.
you mind if I look it up on my email and see?
Which is
What is the
terrible,
email?
but
KLA
yeah, like it's not changing. They've been talking about taking this template, but they probably are still
Yeah, that's the
using
only,
I had
that's,
asked
I did not know
for
I
it.
could do that.
So you, like, yeah, there's no reason you couldn't get started.
Yeah, it would be.
Especially if they, you know, if they want
Weird,
to.
but just
they want to
forward it
work
to
on
you.
it.
Yeah,
As a builder
for sure, so
studies,
links in
yeah.
there,
These
like,
building
I
study
just like
writers
to
get
fill out
really
at one
good.
point, it should direct you to the right place.
A lot of them already have product lines.
I'm glad there are people who want to.
That's, yeah, you can do that.
There's very little that I think.
Yeah, they have to like start.
No, and what we also talk about with this program for folks is you want to be really specific. So let's say you're a jam maker and you want to apply for this grant. You do not apply for this grant for all types of jam. You apply for this grant
Yeah,
for
me too, but not.
like Blueberry
With my
jam.
eyes, not with my hands.
Even better, a specific branded name of blueberry jam.
Ben's blueberry jam. And that way you, like, once you finish, so you can never go back to the well with VAPG for the same product.
So you can go back again for another one.
So you can go
Yeah,
back to the
yeah.
well for a different jam.
Yeah.
If you say we're doing a line of jams and that's our grant, all of those jams are out.
Is this like a line of pickled mushrooms then, or was it one?
It's
specific
one
one?
specific recipe.
Oh, specific
But
recipe.
they've already been pickling their little mushrooms.
Yeah, they do want to see that you've done, like, so whether or not you have a feasibility study, you're scored with the same criteria. So even if you're applying for the 50, you're up in the applicant pool against the like $250,000 ones. So you have to justify the viability of your project at the FISMA. That's part of why we emphasize the detail so much, just because these other applications have like a 30-page document that talks about like market research and
Someone's already done that work for them.
Yeah, with a full appendix and footnotes.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah, it's fully
Exactly.
cited, that's impressive.
So that here, like a lot, instead of a feasibility study along it, like, is that why their biographies are so lengthy?
well, the other best practice for the APG is when, and as a reviewer, you get like the application questions and then you have like, it's like this giant PDF document that you're going through. So the more you can cite your own feasibility study, the stronger too, because a reviewer is not gonna want to scroll back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, or have 14 screens open to, right? Like, so the more you can have the relevant information repeated.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I imagine too, if you go for the feasibility study first and then you can list that as a grant that you've already been awarded, something that the reviewer may already recognize, whether it's from the same funding body or not, that adds weight to the application that you're meeting currently as well. So as much as you can kind of say, I've gotten this grant for this project, I'm at this stage of it.
Yeah, if you
Starting
can,
small and
if you
building
can
on that.
point to being like ready for the grant, that's always a benefit. Like there's ways to do that without a feasibility study to show like the track record and experience, but for sure, the more you can have things lined up, things ready to go, that's often a challenge for folks because what you're doing is you're lining everything up for the possibility of getting a grant like 6 months from now. And if you're a business and you're running on a small margin and you have, time constraints,
Big if.
that's a big if, and it's a lot of money to put up front, and even if it's just like in terms of sweat equity, like if you're gonna do it yourself, it's a lot of time to say, we're investing in the chance to get a grant. So that's like, this, for example, this mushroom project that we gave you guys, the product was something they wanted to do, but it was actually something that they weren't gonna do immediately. It wasn't like their first product in their line, like their expansion plan. It was kind of something they thought they wanted to do, but they didn't know when they would be ready, and it was kind of like, well, this would make us ready if we got this.
If we got this one.
Yeah, so it was kind of it's always a risk to put, like you don't wanna put your business on hold, but it is also important to note that most grants don't let you look back at expenses either. So if you apply for a grant in April, let's say, they award it in November, and at some point between April and November, you started the work on what was in that grant application. All the work that you've already done is no longer fundable in the grant. The grant usually starts the day you sign the agreement and everything after. So there's a lot of business choices you have to make of like, is it more important to start now? Could I go get debt financing to do something? Could I find a different grant that's quicker and more flexible? Like there's a lot of really core business decisions that you should make those decisions before you start the grant application process.
But like Ben was saying earlier, the helpful thing about like the VAPG or SARE, like these are programs that because they come out every year at approximately the same time, right? You can kind of know in your business trajectory, okay, for 2024 and 2025, like this is my plan A and my plan B. And you can, determine many, many months in advance, like do you have the capacity to plan for something like this, to envision a research project, to bring in the partners? Do you have a couple different products that you're starting that baseline, like consumer outreach, and then like, are you talking to the grocery stores to see if they'd be interested? Do you already have that part of the process started? Because if you're doing that for a couple different things, then you can pick one of them and like run forward with the APG while still moving the other along the line that you were planning.
And the only other thing with that too to keep in mind is, so most of the grants we talked about today are springtime announcements. It's terrible that USDA does that to farmers. They say, hey, you're busy. I mean, farmers are always busy, but like, hey, that time you're getting on your fields, like, oh yeah, now add another thing to it. So, and then they usually don't announce until like September to November is when most get announced. Sometimes a little bit earlier, sometimes a little later.
I think they opened it like, it was 45 days, so it would have been April, beginning of April. It was an April like opening, and it was a deadline of May 15 or 16. Which in most parts of the continental United States, it's like, you know, planting season, many crops.
You could just run back again when that was awarded compared to, so like, if you're planning to apply for a project, then it's gotta be like it's gotta be dated into the future.
Yeah.
To
Yeah, so
start then.
usually a lot of agencies will tell you when to expect award date.
Mhm.
And they usually say like, have your grant. So like the AMS programs, for example, are really good about that. They say start your grant September 30th, end it September 29th of next year. Some grants are a little more squishy and they'll say, we expect to make announcements in late October, you know, so you plan on starting in November, somewhere around there.
So kind of just feedback what you're saying about kind of the, not the nitty gritty, but the concept of what makes for a good grant typically for a small business or a small farm. It sounded to me like what you're saying is you want to avoid doing stuff that makes the crux of your operation dependent on getting the grant or not. And that you instead of a good option for a grant would be something you kind of like to do, but that you weren't sure if you would be able to or not, so you write this in, and if so, then hey, cool, I can quit my other job or whatever and do that for this year.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense.
So I can tell you, like, my strategy as a farmer is I've applied for like little grants, especially as like the infrastructure funding. It's the hardest to get, right? But there are like little bits of programs out there, and so I've kind of I have this like long list of projects that I know I need as a startup, and I'm running like I have my own like way that I'm running the finances of the business, right? And so as those become available, I sort of like jump at it, knowing that then, you know, okay, I'll just choose this other thing off of my list to fund with my own cash this year. I really want to apply for a SARE grant with my friend, but we're so not ready to administer it yet. It's like the earliest we'd apply for that would be fall of 2024. So I kind of have like this running list of like, okay, with no funding at all, like what is the trajectory of the business, right? And then what are the things and what is my schedule and plan? Knowing, as we all know with farming, like that. Yeah, you make plans only to wake up the next day.
Then the deer show up, right?
Yes, yes. The deer.
So a similar question about the what you were saying about like funding a whole line of jams versus funding each jam.
Yeah.
It sort of feels a little cynical, but it seems like what you're saying is like if you want to kind of spread it out, or if you want to maximize your grant opportunities,
Yeah.
then let's say, for example, if I'm breeding barley, which I sometimes do, if I say I think I can breed like a whole smattering of types of Hollis barley, a 2-row, a blue, so on and so on. It would be a lot better to say, I think I can develop a blue Hollis barley.
Yeah, and it depends on the grant program. Like for SARE, you probably are going to really benefit from getting that hyper specific because you'll have to show that you can do the research, and like you've got to control for the different variables and things like that. Same for the APG. There are other programs, I think, as you were about to say, where like a broader scope makes more sense.
Yeah, so there's a lot of programs that are actually more about like supporting the industry as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes they read like they are good for an individual farmer or business, and they're not. They're really more set up for like a nonprofit network or something like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sometimes they are. Sometimes, you're a local grain miller or like a local grain grower, and you want to do a cooperative mill in your community and you want to take the lead on it and do it. Like you might be better suited for that. But yeah, those grants that are really good for farmers specifically tend to be specific is good for you in the long run. Like we know a lot of folks who have done multiple VAPGs one after another. So like as one is ending, they apply for the next one for a different product. We have a client who's going back to the well this time for their third VAPG, hopefully. And they've just done a different, or a fish processor, and they've done a different fishing product every time.
Dairy farmers do like a cheese and then like a chocolate milk.
Yeah.
Is this something, is this something where like if you were planning to apply for multiple VAPGs, where like certain chunks of it you can keep the same every time and just like truly copy and paste it?
Yeah,
To
like
make
your
it
background
easier for
information, your financials are probably like, if you're keeping them updated, like you're just, updating them. Your business is still your business, right? So there's a lot of pieces around like the technical feasibility for that product. So that's one thing with like VAPG specifically is the more specific you can be in the sections about the product, not about your business as a whole, the more competitive you are. But there's probably things where you're changing words, and like, you're moving from cheese to milk, or things like that.
And it might be like if you could have the same partners, right? Like and generally, for grant applications in general, rather than saying grocery stores, if you can name the stores, your application's gonna be stronger. The more you can name, sometimes it is better, right? So you want to think about how the reviewer's reading it. So in something like this, where they're asking for information about the specific product and the viability and the market of that product, like showing that you have actual people interested in it, makes it way stronger. Now, you might have one grocery store interested in working with you if you're doing like a larger community-based project, and so you probably will want to say like, oh, this is a prospective partner, but also part of our outreach plan is reaching out to others, but we know we can have success there because we've already got this existing relationship. So to kind of reframe it is a little bit of a cynical view, but it's also about like thinking about how is the reviewer reading this, right? Nobody's going to know your business as well as you do. And honestly, the reviewer's probably not going to know your specific industry as well as you do. Like a lot of the MPEP reviewers are not in the meat processing world.
I doubt this mushroom proposal went in front of anyone who grows mushrooms.
Right. And that kind of goes for most of the grants. Like whatever you're doing is probably very unique in some ways, and so it's about like contextualizing that uniqueness within a larger scope of like how agriculture works in the country.
So I know we're like running out of time. We didn't do the activity, but I think just like seeing the proposal is going to be helpful. Yeah, take that with you. Feel free to think about proposal writing as plagiarism. I'm not advocating it, but I'm saying if you guys want to like copy language from that, it does not offend me because I'll never see it and it's not going anywhere public. And if it helps someone get money to do good work, that's great.
We don't copy the business information.
Yes.
That's not
Yeah.
business information.
I think everyone understood what I meant.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't think. Am I being
You can
funny?
cut
It's
that from
fine
the
to be
recording. But yeah, any like final questions, thoughts? Hopefully this was useful.
Do you have a final question? Is this the type of thing that like, is there any sort of detriment to applying multiple times? Is there anything like, well, you've like gotten this grant before? Cool.
Not for, so certain programs, yes. One, you typically can't have the same program or the same program category sometimes active at the same time. So like you can't have an active VAPG when you already, or you can't apply for a new VAPG until you close out your previous one. So they won't let you like triple up at the exact same time, like, so that sort of thing. On the private foundation side, that is more of an issue of like, rich philanthropist who's given you money now 2 years in a row, wants to give money somewhere else, or they're not as excited as they were about the thing 3 years ago as they are now. And they're, losing interest, so that sort of thing happens more, I think, on the private foundation side.
Yeah. I don't think that there's nothing in the review process that would show that you where it would matter that you had applied but not received the grant. Or the thing that does matter is if USDA knows that you applied, received a grant, and then really didn't administer it,
Oh, yeah.
that's not good.
Yeah. If you don't do a good job, they know that. And that gets reported on their end.
But if you get it, do a good job, and then apply again, then
That's great.
more
Yeah.
evidence. You're like, what, got it, did it. I can
Yeah,
apply
so
again.
certain grant applications will say like, what's your capacity to project manage this grant? And if you can write in like, well, we've administered, $2 million of grants over the last few years, like that looks great. Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. Hopefully we didn't bore you.
Thank you.